block as far as what evidence is being used to kind of get people into the system that may be living regular lives?
I commented on the last block, literally on the way over to the high school today. I was talking to another colleague, we had a case for sharing, where my client was, he came when he was 16, and I was his lawyer representing through the political asylum process, and one day, Immigration Customs Enforcement went to his house and arrested him, put him in detention where he's still sitting because they said he was a gang member. And we had no police reports, no records, and a lot of it came because they revealed yesterday in court, they released all these photos from him on social media where he's wearing Air Jordans and a Chicago Bulls jersey, which apparently are the insignias of one of the gangs. And they said this is the evidence. There's no criminal record, no reports saying he committed any criminal acts. They're saying this is showing he's affiliated with a gang. And now our role as lawyers and the immigrants themselves to try to prove a negative, that you're not a member of a gang and you're not a threat to the community. And they're using social media. Jen mentioned in the last block that people have to be careful what you post on social media. If you're wearing certain things, if you have tattoos, if you're associated with certain people, that is all stuff that can be used as evidence in an immigration proceeding. And the rules of evidence in immigration is very different than a criminal case, and it's very difficult to prove a negative.
In criminal cases, you're charged with a crime, and it's the government's burden to prove that you committed the crime. And if they can't meet their burden, you don't get convicted. It's the opposite in many ways in immigration court. So if you're asking to stay here and you want to be eligible for a pathway to lawful status, you're the one who has to show that you're eligible for that. And if the government says, look, I have a picture and I think this person's a gang member, that is sufficient unless you can show otherwise. And that's an incredibly hard burden to meet, both because how do you prove a negative, but particularly, there's no, as Marissa was saying, there's no right to appointed counsel in immigration proceedings. So the majority of people who are detained are unrepresented. So they're going in front of an immigration judge with an immigration prosecutor, and they're trying to make a legal argument, and they have no lawyer. Many of them don't speak English particularly well. The right to interpretation in immigration court is very limited. Basically, anything that's being spoken to you is interpreted, but nothing else. So these proceedings are happening around you, and you have no idea what's going on. Often people are actually not even brought into court. It's done on video conference, so they can't see what else is happening in the courtroom. The immigration process is very difficult to navigate, even with a lawyer. The example that I gave in the last session, we had a client who is from Chelsea, and they were arguing that he was a gang member because he was wearing blue and white. And we were able to say, well, that's actually just his school uniform. And that alone wasn't sufficient. The judge wasn't convinced that he was not a gang member. And I think one of the things that's hard is that a lot of our clients come from places where there are gangs, and your friend might be a gang affiliated, but you're not. But because you're with your friend, the police make a report and say, well, we saw Joe with Tom, and therefore Joe must be a gang member. And there's no way to prove that you're not if that's who you're spending time with.
And now, kind of between the sessions, now you're in a database.
Right.
You have a gang database that the local police, the FBI, ICE, that they're all part of, and they share that information. And one question was asked, and I don't have an answer. How do you get yourself out of that database once you're in it?
You don't. You're in it. Yeah. And I mean, I think the other scary thing that we see is if you were actually in these communities, you'd realize that if you went to the clothing shop that's down the street from East Boston High School, they're only selling blue and white clothing. I mean, because that's the colors of the El Salvadoran flag.
Right.
Because most of the kids there are El Salvadoran.